Good evening, Facebook. Good evening, YouTube. Good evening, wherever we're streaming. We're all green. Good. I like green. Man, what a beautiful, beautiful evening. It's been a beautiful day as well, so I'm glad to be here. This time I've brought my notes, just so you'll be happy to know. And, hey, Governor, how you doing? So you've just got to love children, right? So some of you know that I have a daughter, Rachel, and I baptized Rachel. I had the privilege of doing that about a few months ago, and I've got a little grandson, right? And he's one of those children, man, he's just into everything. He's just like take things literally, slightly on the spectrum maybe. He's just like, he's a handful, but he's a beautiful child, right? He's one of these, he goes up, he'll FaceTime me, and I literally answer the FaceTime. He says, "Hey, Papa Wayne, I love you," click. Okay, I love you too. But Rachel, on Sunday after church, she texted me, and she says, "Okay, I don't know what I've done here, but are there any how-tos on how to get Jax to stop praying that he dies tomorrow to meet Jesus?" And I'm like, "What? What have you been telling him?" And she says, "Nothing. We just watched King of Kings last night. So now he's watched King of Kings, and now he wants to die and meet Jesus." I'm like, oh boy. I'm just grateful that she didn't show him Passion of Christ. That's all I know. Because Passion of Christ traumatized me. I do not know what it would have done to a little 5-year-old. But anyway, pleased to know I've got my notes. So we're going to pick off where we left off last week. And let's make sure that I don't get any interruptions. Nope, I've turned off. So despite me forgetting my notes last week, what we did was that we looked at Paul's situation, but more importantly, we looked about how he understood his situation. Right? If you remember, he's writing from prison. He's restricted. He's limited to what he can do. And from the outside, it would have been easy to assume that everything had slowed down and that even everything about his ministry had come to an end. And I don't know about you, but if we're honest, that's sometimes where we read our own lives, that when the things don't move as we want them, when things get restricted or they don't seem to be happening for us, when we don't see any real progress ahead of us, I think we all, well, at least I do, I start to assume the same thing, that something has stalled, something has stopped, I'm not in God's will, God isn't happy with me, I've done something to upset God. But you understand that in the middle of all this, Paul didn't see it that same way, right? He sees that despite him being where he is, the message is still moving, but it's going through a different path. So before, when he was on the outside, he was, the churches were growing, right? The gospel was being spread. But now he's in prison, and you think, right, there's nothing happening. But what is he doing? He's chained to guards. I like that picture. He's literally chained to guards, and they're with him 24/7. Obviously, they're doing shift changes in the middle of it, right? But he's captive with them. And so these people are getting the message of Christ. But not only that is that his situation is beginning to shape the people around him, right? So the believers outside are becoming more confident. They're more willing to speak and be open about sharing the gospel. Not because anything gets any easier for them, because it never does, right? But because they watched how Paul carried it. See, Paul was the role model. And I think, right, that that's something we don't always think about, because we tend to assume that influence comes from what we say, but the truth is it more often comes from how we live our lives, right? Especially when things in our lives are difficult for us. Some of you know that country song, Rodney Atkins. You know the one? I've been watching, I'm not going to sing, right? So just to know that I'm not going to sing. I've been watching you, right? The little boy was watching his dad, right? And emulated even the bad stuff as well as the good stuff, right? And that's the reality of our lives. There's always somebody somewhere watching us. And not just when things are going well for us, but even when it isn't, right? People are still watching. And it's important how we carry our lives and how we carry ourselves in those moments. Because the way we do that can really give someone else the courage to stand. Or the opposite, the permission to shrink back. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the negative is always remembered. I don't know why, but they always remember the negative. I can do 100 good things, but you just wait till I do that one bad thing. And they'll remember forever. There's something else that was in that passage that was easy to overlook as well, right? That not everybody comes from the same motives as we do. Some people were stepping forward because they had an agenda of their own, right, to promote. Others were using the moments for themselves, right? And in the middle of all of that, Paul saw all of that very clearly. And what I like is that he didn't ignore it. He didn't pretend that it wasn't there. He acknowledged it all, right? And then he makes a decision that we all need to hold on to. That even in the middle of pressure of our lives, in the middle of everything that can be seen in turmoil and not everything going the way that we want it, Christ was still being made known right there. And that became Paul's anchor. And that needs to become ours, at least mine anyway, right? That needs to be the same anchor, that Christ must still be made known no matter what is going on in my life. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go into something deeper, right? Because it's one thing to believe that God is still working in our lives, but it's another thing to ask, what does that mean in how I live my life today? Not just in how I see my situation, but what my life is actually centered on. So, I don't know about you. I think that most of our lives, right, we spend them trying to make things work, right? We're trying to make things go forward. We're trying to figure things out on our own. At least I'm going to say me most of the time. I'm trying to build things that look stable for me sometimes, right? And a lot of my decisions, right, are shaped by that. What's best for Wayne? What's safest for Wayne? What moves things forward for Wayne? See, as long as those things are working in my life, then those questions, what's best for me, will all seem fine for me as well, right? But have you had those moments, right, when life seems to stop working, when those questions stop working for you, right? When I don't have any control over anything anymore. When I don't know what the outcome is going to be. When I don't have any clue or any idea about the future and what it's holding for Wayne, right? In those moments, what I've been building my life on will get exposed. Not get exposed for me personally, but get exposed to those people who are around me and see me and watching me, right? I think that it's really what happens when things do not go well. What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to position myself? And then I start to question, what is my life actually about? And I think then when we move into this, the first two verses, right, we're going to go to Philippians 1:19. That will start to begin to answer some of this, right? So I'm going to stay at 19 first. So, for I know that as you pray for me and the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me, this will lead to my deliverance. Notice those first three words. For I know. Paul isn't guessing here. He isn't trying to have some optimism about what's happening. He states very clearly, I know. That's settled confidence, right? He already knows. He's settled that in himself. Do you understand what his confidence isn't in? It's not in getting out of prison. It's not in his situation improving or changing. What he's confident in there are two parts that are going to be in motion right here before the outcome, right? Two parts in motion before the outcome. What he is, as the church prays, if you go, right, so as the church prays, and as the Spirit of Christ helps him. Those two things will have an outcome, his deliverance. So deliverance, what does that mean? Sometimes, I don't know, like, I'm I minored in English literature, right? I majored in computer science, minored in English literature. I've read a lot. I've read a lot of books. And I love to study words and read words, and at one point I would be called a walking thesaurus. I just knew what every word meant, right? I literally would read thesauruses for fun sometimes, right? When we think of deliverance, most often not, we think of like escape, maybe, relief, getting out of something, right? But Paul is using it more deeply than that here. See, what the deliverance means, this word is carrying the idea of being brought through something, being preserved in it, being brought to the right outcome, and not just a comfortable one. Do you hear that? The right outcome, not just a comfortable one. So what that meant for Paul was that Paul is not saying, I'm confident that I will be released. What he's saying is, I'm confident that this moment here, that this situation will not define me, and this situation will not be wasted. So that in the end, Paul's life will still reflect Christ, his faith will still hold, and his purpose will still remain intact. Whether he gets out of prison or he doesn't get out of prison. And again, how does that happen? Paul points out those two things. As you pray for me, and the Spirit of Christ helps me. So what Paul knows in this moment is that he is not carrying this alone. So he has a church praying for him, and he has the Spirit of Christ present within him and his life. That's not self-sustained strength. I know a lot about self-sustained strength because I've tried to do that so many times. Paul isn't talking about that. He is talking about a supported and supplied strength from Christ himself. How often do we default to that? I know I don't. My default is probably like, how can I engineer this to my ends, whatever that means, right? So what does it mean for the church in Philippi? I think this would matter to them as well. Because what it means is that they are a part of what God is doing in Paul's life, right? They're part of it. Why? Because they're actively praying for him. Even at a distance, he's in here, but at a distance, they're out there. Their prayers are not small, they're significant. And their involvement is not passive. It's an active involvement. And what they are doing is they are participating in his endurance. They may not feel like that, but that's what's really happening in the spiritual realm, right? That is what is happening. I think for us, right, that we often think is that if God is working, then things should surely change, right? Paul right here is showing us something very different. God's working may not remove him from the situation. And it may not remove the situation from us for whatever we're going through. But God will sustain you through it. That I know to be true. So when Paul is saying, this will lead to my deliverance, he is not saying I'm going to get out. But he is saying, I'm going to come through this in the right way, no matter what. See, deliverance is not always getting out of something. It's being carried through whatever it is you're going through. So let's go to 20, please. For I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but I will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ whether I live or die. I fully expect and hope. That connects back to verse 19, right? Directly. His confidence is not in the outcome, it's in how he will live through the outcome. And then that phrase, right, was, will never be ashamed. That's a very important phrase to define right there. Because sometimes when we think of ashamed, right, we think of embarrassment. What it means is that it's shrinking back, losing courage, failing to stand when it matters. So for Paul, it's not, will I survive it, but will I stay true in it? Will I hold steady, remain bold, and not give way and retreat under pressure? You've got to think what he's going through, right? I spent a night in jail. I wanted out within 20 minutes of being actually locked up, right? You get me out of here, right? This man is in jail, chained, shackled, and I think that he really knew where he was going, where this was heading. He wasn't ever going to get out. He held steady. What was he focused on? That I will continue to be what? Bold for Christ. That was his focus, being bold for Christ. Not about getting out, making his life easier, avoiding hardship. That's what I tend to do. How can I avoid hardship? But about remaining faithful inside the situation that he's finding himself in. And I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ. That's everything right there. Everything. So what Paul has settled for himself, that his life is not about him anymore. That's gone. Ain't never coming back. This is about Christ. And Christ alone, right? How can I bring honor to your name despite the circumstances that I find myself in? So what does it mean to bring honor to Christ? I think that for Paul, it's that Christ is seen clearly through his life in how he responds, how he endures, how he lives under pressure, and when everybody is watching him. There's pressure in that as well, right? There were people waiting for him to slip up, to fall off, to denounce Christ, right? But that line right at the end, I love that line. Whether I live or die. Because you understand now that his purpose does not change. Whether he lives, and his purpose doesn't change if he dies. So what he's doing, he's no longer tying his life to the outcome. It is tied to who he belongs to, Christ. So what did that mean for the church in Philippi at this point, right? Because they are watching this all unfold. And like I said earlier, what they're seeing is a life that is holding steady, even when they don't know what the outcome is. I think Paul knew what the outcome was going to be. I have no doubt about that. But the church outside, what were they praying for? I don't think we have any real clear idea, but man, I believe that sometimes they may be praying that he get out, that he can be part of the bigger picture. But they didn't understand the bigger picture was where he was at. But seeing that, him holding true, what does that do for them? It gives them courage. That if he can do it in this situation, then maybe we can do it. It gives them clarity. It gives them understanding. A model to follow. And what does that mean for us? Because this is where it presses in on our lives sometimes, right? Because I know what I tend to do sometimes, right? I'm like, how do I fix this? How do I change this? How do I get out of this? Boy, oh boy, I've had many times working out, how am I going to get out of this? But Paul doesn't ask any of that. He asks something completely different. How do I live in this in a way that reflects Christ? See, 19 talks about God will carry me through this, but in verse 20, so I will live faithfully in this. Do you understand that my life is not defined by what happens to me? But it's defined by what is seen through me. I thought it was the opposite for the longest time, right? But it's not. None of my past defined Wayne, not one bit. But how I've responded, walked through, come through the other side, and continued my story, right? That's what's defining me. Staying true to Him, the one that loves me. So if that's true, then what is my life really actually about? So verse 21, please. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. The first three words, again, are important. For to me, to Paul. Paul is saying that it's not just a statement, this is something that he has settled personally within himself. This isn't theoretical teaching he's trying to give to people. This is his conviction that he's trying to pass to you, right? Living means what? Living for Christ. Right? It's a very simple statement, and it's not a shallow statement. It's very deep, right? He's not just saying, I believe in Christ, because I can say that all day long. What he's saying is, Christ is the center of my life. Can you say the same? So everything in Paul's life right now runs through that one question. Does everything I'm doing, saying, and behaving, does it reflect Christ in how he responds, how he suffers, how he speaks, and how he lives through the suffering and through all the other stuff, right? Living for Christ. See, Christ defined his purpose, his direction, his decisions. Paul has abandoned all the other things that we tend to hold on to, right? Comfort, success, control. Sound familiar? His was not around any of that. It was around Christ. And the second half, right? And dying is even better. I would beg to differ sometimes, but I've come close sometimes. Right, I have come really close sometimes. I think sometimes this is where some people get uncomfortable, right? But it's something that needs to be defined. Paul is not chasing death. He's not doing that, right? And he's not being dramatic either. What he's saying is, if I live, I'll live for Christ. And if I die, guess what? I am with Christ. What does that mean? There's no losing outcome, y'all. Right? No losing outcome here. Because why? Because Christ is at the center of both. I live for him or I die with him. That's where Jim got to in the end, right? He was looking forward to taking that last breath. Hard to say, I know, but he was. There are times in my life when I've actually thought about, I'm done, I'm tired, I want to go home. I've had enough. Is this it? So verse 19, it says, God is carrying me through. Verse 20, I'm living faithfully in it. And verse 21 is that my life belongs to Christ. So what does that mean for the church at Philippi and for this church, right? Because when you heard this, right, you start to begin to see something different. Paul's life was not controlled by fear. Our lives should not be controlled by fear. Not fear of suffering, not fear of loss, not fear of death. No fear. Did you ever have those T-shirts over here at one time? No fear? When I was stupid and young, that's what I had. I used to have all of those on. There'd be some really weird statement and then it'd be, no fear. You know what the reality is? I was scared little boy most of my time, right? I was a little boy trying to play in a man's world. This is where it really needs to press in for us as people, as a church. Because I think most of us, at some point, live with a different center. I think we may say that Christ is important for us, that he's in my life, right? I believe in him. But sometimes functionally, our life is still built around what works for us, what feels safe, and what's going to move things forward for me. That's default. That's humans being humans, right? But I have to ask myself some things directly. What is actually at the center of my life? I can't answer for you, but what is at the center of Wayne's life? Because whatever that is, whatever is at the center of my life, right, will shape how I respond when my life does not go the way I expect it. Do you hear that? It's taken me a long time for Christ to be at the center. For many years, right, it was my career, it was my family, it was whatever interested me at the time, right? Good catch, Mike. I've realized that if I'm holding to those things at the center of my life, when my life fell apart, and it fell apart often, my response wasn't Christ-centered half the time, right? Typically it was fear of what was going to happen next, the consequences of what I've done, because there's always a consequence to your decisions you make. You understand that? Always a consequence. We all have a choice to make. And you've got to understand that whatever that choice is, whether it's do something, not do something, it's still a choice. And both carry a consequence. Bless you. But it all comes down to this reality. If my life is centered on outcomes, what happens when they don't come? I tend to struggle. If my life is centered on comfort, do you know what I found? I struggle when it's taken away from me. But if I consider myself, right, centering my life on Christ, then that purpose doesn't change anything. See, if Christ is my life, then my life still has meaning, no matter what happens to me. And that's the shift that I found in my life today, right? Let's go to, where are we at, 22? So I've got to understand, right, that it's no longer about what my life prefers, it's all about what he purposes. That's the key shift I have to have, right? My preferences must go out the window if I'm living for Christ. I'm going to go probably 22 to 24. I'm going to read through them all, right? But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ, so I really don't know which is better. I'm torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me. But for your sakes, it is better that I continue to live. I'm torn between two desires. That's an honest statement right there, right? That's about as honest as it comes. So he's already settled within himself to live as Christ, right? But now he's feeling another tension inside, right? Because to live means I've got to continue here, right? Although he's settled some things, it still means that's what it's going to be. But if I die, all this goes away. I'm going to be with the Father, right? What a dilemma. That's why he says, I'm torn. It wasn't confusion or doubt that it was tearing him. That's two good things competing against each other right here, right? So when Paul is saying, I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me, that's personal. That's him saying, man, if I go, it's going to be over. I can be with the Father. I'm going to be dancing, whatever we do, right? That's his desire. That's what he really wants. And to be honest, I've been there many times, right? But probably much not from the, I just got tired of life sometimes, right? But sometimes, I just think, man, it would be good to go home, right? That's what Paul wants at that moment. Why? Because he's not afraid of death, y'all. What he sees is being with Christ fully. No pressures, no limitations, no suffering. But then he goes on to say, but for your sakes, it's better that I continue to live. Now, I don't know if I could actually say that about many of you. Sorry, not sorry. That's the turn for Paul. That's what it means for him is now he's shifting from what I want to what is needed. Again, it's not about preference or comfort, about what he chooses for himself, because he's thinking in terms of what the real purpose is. He understands. And for Philippi, right, the church in Philippi, that what they would hear clearly is this. Paul is saying, even now my life is not centered on me. Not even when I'm in prison, not even in all this uncertainty. I am still thinking about you. Excuse me a second, I'm pulling this out my back because I can feel it shifting. Sorry. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to have a tape to my ear next time or something. Most of the time in my life, right, I'm asking these questions. What do I want? What's going to work best for me? That self, right? Self-centeredness, that ego that we have. What feels right to me? But Paul flips it and says, what is needed? Right now. See, if he were to go, who knows what would have happened at that moment in the church in Philippi? Most times when death happens, people get confused, fear, right? They lose hope. They lose sight of what really is happening. I've understood today that believing in Christ is about living beyond myself, right? We all have a purpose that we're called to. Are we willing to fulfill the purpose? No matter the cost. See, when my life belongs to Christ, it is no longer driven by preference, but by purpose. So this is the movement that's still being carried on, right? 19, I'll be carried through. 20, I will live faithfully in it. 21, my life belongs to Christ. And 22 to 24, so I will live beyond myself. Paul was torn. I'm torn sometimes, not between right and wrong, but between what I want and really what is needed. If it was what I want, I'd be in a church in Hawaii. On the beach church in Hawaii. So let's go to 25 to 26, please. So knowing this, I am convinced that I will remain alive so I can continue to help all of you grow and experience the joy of your faith. And when I come to you again, you will have more reason to take pride in Christ Jesus because of what he is doing through me. Again, verse 25, knowing this. Again, right? He settled something, right? What I want, what is needed. He's already settled that. So what he's saying when he says, and knowing this, he's telling us, I've come to this settled place. It's okay. This is it. I've settled this. But then Paul becomes convinced of something, right? I will remain, not because it's an easier path, not because it's what he prefers, because it's serving the purpose that Christ has given to him. What's that purpose? So I can continue to help all of you grow. So Paul has become very clear that he sees his purpose and his life as continuing to enable the church to grow. And you understand Philippi that he's talking to right here, that church where they were his friends, he'd known them for 10 years. They were important to him. It was important to them that despite that 10 years of growth, that he continues to want to see them grow even more. And Paul's job is to contribute to that growth. And that's not just a knowledge, that's about his maturing in faith, becoming steady and learning how to live his life out, whatever his life looks like. And then, right, that he adds this, right, and experience the joy of your faith. Not just growth, but your faith growing, right, brings joy. That's why I love to work with people, right? I mentor a lot of people, men, right? I mentor a lot. I love mentoring people because you get to see, because I'm all about this. I'm about training, equipping, and releasing. Drawing alongside people, encouraging them, exhorting them, and then seeing the light go on in their eyes, right? When you see the light go on in somebody's eye and you know, like, whoa, that's rewarding in itself. That's not about Wayne's ego. That's about seeing something turn on, and then you suddenly see, like, they're heading down here, and then all of a sudden the light goes off, and they say, whoo, and they go. Wow. That brings me joy, I know that. I work with a lot of people. I've trained a lot of people. I've mentored a lot of people. That is one of the most important and joyful things that I had in my life, and I continue to do that. Will always continue to do that. Because I understood as well, it's not about Wayne anymore, right? It's not about me. Paul, right, becomes convinced of something. I will remain. Because it serves a purpose. The purpose is to continue to help all of you grow. So what Paul's life means for him now, despite being in prison, right, and despite being chained, his whole life is oriented about this. Their growth, their stability, their joy, not his. So what Paul is telling the church in Philippi is that my life is still connected to you. Even though it's at a distance, even though you can't necessarily see me, I am still thinking and praying and trying to do something to allow your future to grow, right? For that church to grow. In verse 26 is like when you will have even more reason to take pride in Christ Jesus because of what he is doing through me. See, that outcome is not look at Paul, but look at what Christ is doing through Paul. It's not about pointing to himself. It's not about pointing to ourselves either, right? It's all about pointing to Christ. See, a Christ-centered life is not a life that's focused inward, even though there are times when we must go inward and do some work, right? But it's not continuing that focus inward. It's not about being driven by any preferences that we may have. And definitely not defined by any outcomes, because if it was defined by outcomes, it would be a mess. Because sometimes I don't understand or see the bigger picture of what God is really doing. Everything is about, and it's the mantra that I have, if everybody who knows me, how may I serve you? That's the mantra. It's about serving others. Not serving self, but how may I serve you as individuals and you collectively as a church? How may I serve you? And I've understood, right, that the more that I've centered my life on Christ, the more the desire is to go and serve others, right? To love others unconditionally and unashamedly and to serve them wherever I can. So what happens here that Paul settled things like he's settled outcomes that a lot of us have spent a long time trying to avoid. Most of my early life was trying to avoid some of the outcomes, right? Focusing on my preferences, worrying about what's always going to happen next. But you know, the truth is this, right? Paul's life belongs to Christ. My life belongs to Christ. I hope that your life belongs to Christ. And if that is the truth, here's another truth. Then you are free. You're free from needing things to work out in a certain way. You're free from being driven by what you want. It's free to live something beyond ourselves, right? And I think for me, and I hope for you, that's where things become very personal. Because it's easy to say that Christ matters, but it's different to say that my life is actually centered on him, right? All right. That's all I got. Any questions? Any insights? Good? Okay. I'm willing to take questions if people have questions. I may not have answers, but... Okay, let's pray. Father God, you see our lives more clearly than we do. You see what we hold on to, what we depend on, what we build our lives around. And when things don't go the way that we expect, that's when it always shows. Help us center our lives on you instead. Not just in what we say, but in how we live. Teach us to trust you, even when the outcomes are uncertain for us. And Father, please shape our lives in a way that reflects Christ right where we are in the now. In Jesus'